Hi everyone, and thanks for attending this webinar. I'll be talking to you tonight about how non-human primates can help explain human behavior. I'm Dr. Darby Proctor. I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Florida Institute of Technology, and as you probably can guess, I do research with non-human primates. So I'm sure you've all heard that we are 98% related to chimpanzees. They're our closest genetic relative in the primate lineage. And an interesting thing is that while we're 98% related to chimpanzees, according to our genetic code, we're also 50% bananas. And so one of the things that I'm interested in exploring is why humans do things for themselves that are not good for them. Why do we go against our own self-interests when making decisions? Why, for example, do we eat very unhealthy food when we know it's bad for us? Why do we spend money gambling when we know we're not going to lose? A few years ago, one gaming area in the Philippines brought in $33 billion in casino revenue. So why are people okay with losing that amount of money? And then finally, why do we make other sorts of economic decisions that are not good for us? Why do we pay more for a name brand item of clothing when a nearly identical piece of clothing is available for a much lower cost? So I'm interested in exploring why we make these patterns of decisions that go against our own self-interests. So I often take my research from an economic perspective because if you think about costs and benefits, that can tell us what we should do, how we should behave. So according to traditional economic models, people should behave rationally. And what that means is that we should weigh the costs and benefits of our actions, and we should act on that cost-benefit analysis in a way to maximize our resources. So we should be doing things to maximize the amount of money we have or whatever other benefit you're looking for. Now, that's what we should do according to traditional economic theory. But as you already have guessed, that's not what we actually do. So there's another subfield in economics called behavioral economics. This studies what humans actually do instead of relying on those traditional economic models. So I work in behavioral economics with non-human primates, but we take a number of different economic games from the human literature and try and adapt them to non-human primates so that we can better compare where in our evolutionary history we found these behaviors. So for example, there's a pretty famous example in behavioral economics called the Ultimatum Game. This is a very simple game where you bring two people into a lab, you offer one of them an amount of money, say $10, and you tell them that the first person, they can divide that amount of money in any way they want with the second person. But if the second person rejects that amount of money, then they both go home with nothing. If the person accepts that offer, great, then they split the money that way and they both go home with whatever that split of the money was. So imagine that you are in this scenario and you are the proposer. So I've given you $10 and you can choose how to split that with someone else. So just think for a second what it is you would do in that situation. How much of that $10 would you offer someone? Now, if you're like the majority of humans that live in industrialized cultures, you said that you would offer $5. You did that probably because you felt that it was fair. But if we think about this from an economic perspective, this doesn't really make much sense. What you should do, according to cost benefits, is offer them the lowest amount of money possible. So if I had given you 10 $1 bills, what you should have done was offer the second person $1. Now, when we play this game in a lab setting, if people offer $1, then that offer tends to get rejected. But again, that makes no sense because the second player is being offered $1, and that's $1 more than they had when they initially came into the lab. So why would you ever turn away free money? And so we think this has something to do with the human sense of fairness, and it just makes decisions look strange in this economic context. So what I try to do is look to the non-human primates and hunt down where in our evolutionary history that type of feeling like a sense of fairness that leads to these economically suboptimal decisions came about in the primates. So in the non-human primates, we have four main groups of primates, starting from the ones that are most distantly related to humans. Those are the prosimians. These are things like lemurs. If you've seen the movie Madagascar, you probably have seen the king lemur that was in that. Then the prosimians also have some other animal species that, if you didn't know they were primates, you probably wouldn't think they were primates. So if you're interested in that, go Google something like the ii. It's spelled AYE-AYE. This is a really weird primate species that, again, unless you knew it was a primate, you probably wouldn't think it was a primate. Moving slightly closer in terms of genetic relatedness to humans, we get to the New World monkeys. These are things like Capuchin monkeys, squirrel monkeys, spider monkeys. These, as the group name implies, are the monkeys that live throughout Central and South America. So Capuchins, you may have seen these if you watch the Night at the Museum movies or from Ross on Friends. He briefly had a monkey in that series, and so those are one of the most well-known of those New World monkey primate species. Moving even closer to humans in terms of genetic relationships, you get to the Old World monkeys. These are things like macaques and baboons. So this is a picture of a baboon here. These monkeys are spread throughout Africa and Asia. And then finally we get to the apes, and in particular we're interested in the great ape species, because the great apes include humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and bonobos. Interestingly, while I said that we were 98% chimpanzee at the beginning of the talk, there's this other species, the bonobo, that we are equally as related to. Just bonobos aren't as well known as chimpanzees. So humans and chimps and bonobos share that very close genetic relationship. So I wanted to take just a couple minutes to talk to you about some of the species that you're going to see throughout this presentation and give you a little background history on those species. Chimpanzees, as you probably have guessed from my title and what I've talked about so far, are an important species if we want to study the evolution of human behaviors. So chimpanzees are one of the great ape species, and they're from Central Africa. Now, chimpanzees are incredibly intelligent animals, but unfortunately they're also critically endangered, and most likely they will go extinct in the wild in our lifetimes. So it's important for us to learn what we can from them now. The other species I wanted to highlight are Capuchin monkeys. These are monkeys from South America that have very large brain to body size ratios. So what that means is that for an animal of their size, they have a pretty big brain. If we look at all the animal species, humans have the biggest brain to body size ratio, then chimpanzees and dolphins are second and third in that brain to body size ratio. And we use that ratio as sort of a rough estimate of how intelligent an animal is. If your body has invested the energy resources to create a brain that is pretty big compared to your body, then we think you probably have more advanced cognitive skills than a similar sized animal with a smaller brain. Okay, so that being said, I want to turn now to what we know from behavioral economics of the non-human primates. So this first video I'm going to show you, it's a bit grainy, but it's from 1937, so I hope you will excuse that. What this video is there are two chimpanzees, these are young chimpanzees, and they both have access to ropes. Attached to the end of these ropes is a large tray that's quite heavy. And on that tray are some banana pieces, and yes, primates love bananas. So the chimpanzees, what they have to do to get this very heavy tray is they have to work together to both pull the ropes at the same time, because the tray is so heavy that one of them couldn't pull it in on their own. They have to work together to solve this task. So what you can see here is that these chimpanzees took to this task very, very readily. They didn't really have to be trained at all to get them to coordinate their actions and cooperate to get the food reward together. But then the researchers did something interesting. What they did is the chimpanzee on the left, they gave a bunch of food beforehand, And so now that chimpanzee is relatively unmotivated to work to solve this problem and get those banana rewards. And what you can see is that the partner on the right, who is hungry, keeps getting the attention and directing the uninterested chimpanzee back to engaging in the task. And so if we think about traditional economic theory, if you aren't hungry, why would you bother spending the effort to help this other individual? You shouldn't, because you're not getting anything out of it. So we have some hints as early as the 1930s that non-human primates might make similar decisions to us in some economic contexts. And so one thing we wanted to explore was figuring out what helps these cooperative interactions. So to do this, a lab that I was in formerly did a very simple experiment with Capuchin monkeys. This experiment is really simple. What you do is you hand a monkey a rock, and then you ask the monkey to hand that rock back to you. When the monkey does that, you give her a piece of cucumber, and they will trade rocks for cucumbers all day. Now the interesting thing comes when we do this with one monkey. She gets some cucumber, and then we do it with a second monkey, but instead of that monkey getting cucumber, the second monkey will get grapes. And according to Capuchin monkeys, grapes are way better as a food item than cucumbers. So let's see what happens here. First, we will give Lance a rock. She's already given it back, and now she is happily eating a piece of cucumber. We repeat this with the second monkey, who has just returned the rock and now gets a grape. And again, grapes are way better. So now we're going to repeat this with our first monkey, give her some cucumber, and something magical has happened. This cucumber is no longer good, and you can see how visibly annoyed this monkey is at this outcome. So the question is, why would you do this all day for cucumber, and then the second you see someone else get a grape, you start protesting? So here we do it again to see if this behavior holds up, and sure enough, this time she won't even take a bite out of the cucumber, she just throws it directly back to the experimenter. And don't worry, after this experiment, we give them all grapes, and so they stay happy monkeys. But what we think is going on here is that this monkey is paying attention to what her partner is getting and protesting because her partner is getting a better food reward for doing the same work. And so we think this is something like the beginnings of a sense of fairness like what we have in humans. In these monkeys, we call this inequity aversion. So they don't like it when they get unequal outcomes compared to someone else. And so an interesting question then becomes, why do we see this inequity aversion, and we tend to see it in species that cooperate? Well, we think it's because fairness helps enforce cooperation. If you're trying to work with someone else and you get a lesser outcome from that cooperative interaction than they do, maybe that's important information, because maybe you should find a different person to cooperate with. You want to get a fair deal. And so we think now that fairness helps enforce cooperation. So with this information, I decided that it would be really interesting if we tried to run an ultimatum game with chimpanzees. So similar to the human economic game, we had a chimpanzee who could select a reward distribution, and in this case it's not monies, it's pieces of bananas, and that chimpanzee proposer could make an offer to her partner, and then her partner could decide whether to reject that offer or accept the offer. And remember, if they reject the offer, no one gets any food. Now, to do this with chimpanzees, we had to simplify it a little bit. What we did is we trained them on 2 different tokens. So tokens are really just fancy colored pieces of PVC pipe, but we trained them so that each different colored token represented a different split of the rewards. So we gave them a selfish token, where the proposer would get 5 pieces of bananas and the partner would just get 1 piece of banana. And we gave them an equitable option where they would both get 3 pieces of banana. So here's how this looked in sort of graphical form. We would present the tokens to the chimpanzee. The chimpanzee proposer would select one of the offers. would physically hand that to their partner, and then the partner could choose to return the token to me, the experimenter, for whatever split of the rewards that token indicated, or the partner chimpanzee could just refuse to play. And unhappy chimpanzees, or chimpanzees that don't like these outcomes, they have no problem refusing to engage in tasks. So to give you an idea what this looked like with actual chimpanzees, I have a little video. The first thing we did, of course, was train them what the tokens meant. Here, the brown stripe token meant an equal split of the rewards, and the blue token was selfish. So we present those tokens to a chimpanzee. This is Katie. She selected the equitable token, and then she passed it to her partner, Liza. This is from Liza's perspective. Katie's about to hand her the token, and Liza very quickly hands it to me to get the split of that reward. And so what we were interested in seeing was how these chimpanzees would decide the reward distribution. And what we found is that our chimpanzees behaved fairly when we put them in this context. About 72% of the time, they made equitable offers. Now, that sounds like chimpanzees are being fair, but there's an interesting sort of caveat to this. Even though they're behaving fairly, there's a difference between being motivated by fairness versus just behaving fairly. Because the chimpanzee could be behaving fairly because they're afraid of their partner rejecting the offer. So behaving fairly out of selfish motivations versus behaving fairly out of fairness-based motivations. And this is something that we still need to explore in the primates. Now, one interesting thing is that these decisions that look suboptimal in an economic context may make a lot of sense in other contexts. So some researchers played the Ultimatum Game with small-scale societies around the world, and one of those was the Lamellera in Indonesia. So this group is a traditional hunting group of people, and their subsistence largely comes from whale hunting, which is depicted here. And as you can see, they're using fairly low-tech solutions to hunt these whales. Now, when people ran the Ultimatum Game with the Lamellera, what they saw is that when the Lamellera made offers in the Ultimatum Game, they offered 58% of the pool of money to their partner. So they actually offered more than half. And now this was really puzzling at first, but if we think about their culture of whale hunting, it makes a little bit of sense. Because to be invited on a whale hunt, you must be perceived in the society as a generous person. And this is because when you go hunting whales, this will feed you and your extended family for quite some time. So they only want hunters invited who have an established reputation for being able to be generous in the community. So even though these decisions look strange in that economic context, if we look more widely, these decisions might make quite a bit of sense. And so, like the Lamellera, the chimpanzees could be behaving fairly because of some sort of social benefit that is outside of the realm of economics. So again, we need to explore this further. One of the other things that I've been interested in doing is looking at gambling behaviors. And if we try and take this to the non-humans, what we're really asking is how risk preferences compare in non-humans compared to humans. So how do these animals make decisions about risk-taking behaviors? So once again, we went to the human literature, and we found a task called the Iowa gambling task. This is a pretty simple card game type task, and in it what you have are you're presented with a couple of decks of cards, and you're told that when you flip cards you'll get some amount of money, and you should make decisions to make the most money you can. So if you're entering this task, what you might do if you have this red deck and the blue deck is you might first say, okay, I'm just going to randomly pick. I'll select from the blue deck, and I get $2, which isn't a bad outcome, but not great either. So maybe you will then sample from the red deck. And here you get a reward of $6. Well, $6 is obviously a lot better than $2. So on your next trial, you also select from the red deck, but now you lose $4. Okay, so now you have a total of $2 from the red deck and a total of $2 from the blue deck. So now you might think, well, this blue deck might be better than I initially thought. You select that and you get $1. So what happens through the course of this task is that one of these decks gives small and consistent rewards, while the other deck gives really variable rewards. So you could get a big jackpot like $6, but you could also lose money, like losing 4 of those $6 you just gained. And so the blue deck we would call the safe or the less risky deck. The red deck we would call the one that has the most variability, and so it's really the most risky in terms of trying to make the most money. So what we did to adapt this to non-humans is we made decks of cups. So inside each one of these cups are hidden a certain amount of food reward. Like you would see a $sign on the cards, here we have food rewards directly. And so just like those decks, when primates sample from these cups, they get information about how risky they are. So here, the blue deck gave 3 pieces first, and now it gives 3 pieces again. The greenish deck gave 2 pieces, but now it gives none. And so in the primates, we can't take food away from them because they've already eaten it, but we can give them 0 outcomes. So what this looks like with a capuchin monkey is like this. I had to make this strange drawbridge door system because what I found initially is that the capuchin monkeys would just reach their hands out and knock over all of my decks of cups with all the carefully counted food amounts in them. And so these door systems, what it allows the monkeys to do is when they push one door open, the other door closes so that they can only choose from one side. And here the decks are just out of view, but there's one deck of cups on the left and one deck of cups on the right. So this is Lily, and what she does is she pushes down the door for the side that she wants to choose from, and then she's allowed to take those food rewards. And we would do this many times in a row to try and figure out their risk preferences. So what we found is that capuchin monkeys, they didn't care about risk. What they did in every condition we put them through was try and maximize the amount of food that they got, like they should, according to traditional economic theory, right? So they ended up performing like perfect little economists. Humans and chimpanzees, on the other hand, varied quite a bit. So there were some humans and some chimps that really preferred to avoid risk at all costs, even when they could have gotten more total rewards if they had selected from the risky deck. Similarly, we had a couple of humans and a couple of chimps who seemed to prefer risk. They seemed to prefer going for those big jackpots, even though they could lose some money, some food items, when engaging in that sort of strategy. So this is some of the research that I worked on in the past, but most of the primate research in primate cognition and behavior has been focused on a relatively few species. So here I've talked to you about chimpanzees and capuchin monkeys, and those are very common species for psychologists to work with. So what I'm trying to do now at Florida Tech, in conjunction with the Brevard Zoo that's here in Melbourne, is move our science beyond the great apes and capuchins. So now we're doing work with things like spider monkeys, which are another New World primate species that also has a fairly large brain to body size ratio. We're also interested in expanding this type of work to prosimians like ring-tailed lemurs. And then they also have some siamangs at the zoo, which are lesser apes, which I didn't really talk to you about, but there's almost no research being done on their cognitive abilities. So one of the advantages to doing science in a zoo setting is that it's enrichment for the animals, because they get to play fun and challenging games for food rewards, but it also helps to educate the public about science. So here are a couple of examples. This orangutan at Zoo Atlanta, they have in the orangutan exhibit a giant fake tree they call the learning tree, and on one side of this is a touchscreen computer where the orangutans can come and play on that computer for food rewards when they feel like it. And of course, those games that are seen as games to the orangutans are really cognitive tests for the researchers. Similarly, this gorilla at Lincoln Park Zoo is also working on a touchscreen, although you can't see it from this angle, and the researcher is there handing food to the gorilla when it makes correct choices. So taking this model that's been established at some bigger zoos, we're trying to bring in this type of science in zoos into Brevard Zoo. So here is a picture of one of our spider monkeys, Poppy. She's working on a computer touchscreen. You can just see one of my students in the background who's working on training her how to do this. So we can do the same type of science here at Florida Tech in Brevard Zoo that's being done around the country in much larger zoos. Now, one of the other things we've been working on recently is a cooperation task for our spider monkeys. So if you'll remember the 1930s video I showed you earlier where the chimpanzees had to pull on ropes to get a food reward, we've essentially recreated that experiment with spider monkeys. So the setup's a little bit different, but the principle is about the same. So here you'll see us handing ropes to the monkeys, and you'll see how quickly they pull those ropes in to get the food reward. And again, they both have to do this in order for the food to be obtainable by them. And here you see another monkey coming in and thieving some of those food rewards. But so what we're seeing is that spider monkeys can cooperate, just like capuchin monkeys and just like chimpanzees. But that's really interesting because no one has studied spider monkey cooperation before. So we're doing some really cool, innovative research here at Florida Tech in conjunction with Brevard Zoo. Now, of course, I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, so I love that type of work, but another benefit of doing research in zoos is that we can actually help the zoos monitor their animals. So here are a couple of my students. They're collecting behavioral observations on some animal groups, and what we can do with that information is we can help the zoo make decisions about how to manage these animals. For example, we recently had some jaguars that got moved to a brand new exhibit, and so we tracked how they used the space in that new exhibit as they were getting used to it, so that if they had an area that they didn't particularly spend much time in, we could do something to modify the exhibit to help the animals like that area better. So as an undergrad here at Florida Tech, you're able to get some really hands-on and meaningful research experience that can actually benefit the animals in the zoo while you're still here at Florida Tech. So those are a few of the things that we have going on with our animal behavior concentration in the psychology program, and we have a lot more projects on the horizon, so I hope you will keep in touch to find out more about those projects. So science is never an individual effort, so I also want to acknowledge all of the people that help with this research, particularly Brevard Zoo and my undergraduate students who helped me tremendously with this line of research. All right, so I'm going to pause for a couple seconds and see if we have any questions that come in that I can answer for you all. All right, so someone is asking what was the time period that this experiment was conducted. Well, animal research takes often far longer than you think it will. Part of the reason is because we let the animals choose whether or not they want to participate in our research on any given day. So sometimes they don't want to, and that's fine. We'll just come back and try again. So it really varies how long things take. The Ultimatum Game project with chimpanzees took me a very long time, about 5 years. The gambling study was much quicker, only a couple of months, as was the cooperation experiment with the spider monkeys that we're still analyzing the data for. But the actual data collection, I think, took 4 or 5 months. Someone is asking, what was your favorite part of this experiment? Well, I mean, really my favorite part of my job is getting to work with these incredibly intelligent animals. And it's awesome to see the types of decisions they make. And as a scientist, of course, it's really fun to try and figure out why they're doing that and how their decision-making process is similar to humans and what that means for the history of human evolution. But really it's working hands-on with the primates. I mean, they constantly surprise me with the way they interact with different tests. For example, one of our spider monkeys, Poppy, who's actually pictured on this slide, when we first presented her with the computer setup, she actually started reaching out and using her tail to interact with the touchscreen, which, you know, is totally fine. I don't care how they interact with it, but it was a bit unsurprised. I was a bit surprised by that type of behavior. So, you know, it's just really getting to see how clever, how intelligent these animals are. Well, you're quite welcome, Zoe. Just pause a minute, see if we have any other questions. All right, well, that looks like it is about it. I wanted to thank you all once again for attending the webinar, and please stay in touch with Florida Tech to see how our research continues. Thanks.